I think it's time to just shove this out of the way and get busy on shock absorbers. Now, I've actually got like 1.5 sets of shocks here. The standard shock absorbers are the aluminum bodies, straight up aluminum with the I forget what they call the coating anyway. It's the gold coating. Now, what the pros race and what the team supports them with is these shock bodies with the Fox Kashima coating. You can go Google that and learn about it. It's a special coating designed by Fox originally for the dirt bike arena, and they apply that coating to these shock bodies, which makes the inside extra slippery. And then they use the chrome, and the pros have found that taking the chrome and polishing them gives you a better result than the tri-coating, whatever it is. And another nice thing is, because this is a team kit, we get all the aluminum goodies except for the shock caps, which really aren't necessary. The plastic shock caps work fine. If you want to go with aluminum, knock yourself out. It's just extra money. Having the aluminum spring adjusters and the O-rings to go with them is definitely better than plastic. And having the aluminum bottom caps is also nice. They don't wear as fast as the plastic will wear out. You'll possibly strip them. So we've got all of our little shock goodies, and these pistons are a machined piston, which means they are about as circularly perfect as you're going to get. And we've got the machined inner pieces as well. We've got the X O-rings. Instead of it being a round O-ring, the material is shaped like an X, so there's less of a footprint against the shock shaft, which means that there's a better seal, so less leakage. So all good things. So this whole bag, with the exception of these the blue anodized collars, is just going to get set aside and put away. I could build out another set of shocks, but since they're not going to have the Kashima coat, there's no real point. I could use them for testing, but again, same issue. So basically, I think I'm just going to throw all this stuff right back into the bag. And or do I have a Ziploc for this? Yeah, I got a Ziploc I can throw this stuff into. And then set it aside for some other time, some other vehicle. And let's see what they've given us as far as sizes here. We've got 1.6s. And 1.7s. Let me see what's recommended in my build. So in the, that's not the stock kit. Where's the stock kit? Here we go. The stock build calls for 1.6 in the front and 1.7 in the rear. my build calls for 1.7 in the front and 1.8 in the rear, which I don't have, and I'm not going to worry about right now. So 35 for the front and 40 for the, 35 for the rear and 40 for the front. There's some 40. It's always a good idea to write down the brand of your oil as well as the number on your setup sheet, because they can differ from each other as far as their total viscosity. 35 might actually be more like 36 or 37 if you're talking associated versus TLR, or the other way around. Okay, so 16 front, 1.6 front, 1.7 rear. And 40 in front and 35 in rear. So let's just go to the shock section and have a little look-see here. Okay, so you want to pay attention to all of the different options for your shock absorbers. Excuse me. For example, you know, the biggest things you're going to deal with are the first three, which is the piston, the fluid weight, and your spring color, which is going to determine the spring weight. Next is any limiters that you would have. Those go underneath your the piston on the shock shaft, inside the shaft, and that limits how much total stroke that the shock absorber can have. The stroke is also limited by how far you screw on the eyelet. Excuse me. Now, the length of the shock, which is your eyelet to eyelet, we have two different eyelet lengths. As you can see here, we have short and we have long. The long is 2 millimeters longer, and on the your build for the stock setup, you're going to use the longs in the front and the shorts in the rear, which is the same for my build. Then you have the cup offset, which is how far the cup, this lower spring cup, is going to push that spring upward. And in this case, it's 5 millimeters. Likewise for my build, same thing. A lot of stuff you'll find is very standard across all builds. And then there's the fine-tuning things, which is stuff like your springs, your pistons, and your fluids, and also sometimes limiters. So, now, this is important here. Stroke, this measurement is going to be very important to you, and I'll explain why. Our shock, our front and rear swing arms, our lower control arms, do not have a set screw to adjust their maximum droop. That is controlled by the shock absorber. Our ride height is also controlled by our shock absorber. Now, if you had one of these shock absorbers, like, not talking front to rear, I'm talking your left to right. If one of your front shock absorbers is 1 millimeter longer, that's going to mean that the car at maximum can be 1 millimeter higher on one side of the car. And that's not something you want. So you definitely want to have a good means of measuring that, preferably a set of calipers, and you want to fine-tune that eyelet adjustment, how far the eyelet is twisted onto your shock shaft, to make sure that this number matches left to right. And in this case, we have 24 on the left and 29 on the rear. Now, sometimes you'll find pieces like these that don't seem to have a purpose. They don't seem to be mentioned in the build. Sometimes these are from a different kit. It's the same eyelets, and Associated just throws the same parts tree in because it's easier than having to mold a separate tree. So these are probably just going to be set aside at the end of the build. Okay, so that's those should be our 5mm cups. The cup height is, or offset, is the distance between this this surface here, the base, where the cup sits on top of your eyelet, right here. Okay, like that. And then this, which is where your spring is going to sit. So that distance between here and here is how you measure your spring cup. And so we use the 5mm offsets front and rear. So we're going to need these 4 pieces. And the rest of these can get put away. We may use those down the road, test with them or something like that, but for right now, these are the ones we're going to use. And here are the springs they have provided with us for us, which is yellow front and blue in the rear. Now, some of these parts I am not going to need. You will. For example, these 4 lock washers, or excuse me, lock nuts. I'm using blue aluminum lock nuts. And so that's where these would go, would be up there. I'm also using a stud and nut kit on my arms. So you would be using these 4 screws here, which I'm not going to be using. So I can set those aside as well. So, and again, we are all using 2 of the shorts eyelets for the rear, and we're using 2 long eyelets for our 2 front shocks. Now this would be a good time to cut the others off and put them in your parts box along with your shock cups, your spring cups. And the empty parts trays we throw away. You may need these down the road. You might damage one, or you may decide to try testing and you want to have a different height or length in the rear. Like, let's say you're building for a an indoor carpet track. You might want to go shorts in the rear and extra inserts in the front to balance that out and lower your maximum ride height, because you're not going to be going over rocks and lots of ruts. Carpet's almost like driving a street car. It's not Don't quote me on that, but it is similar in that you are preparing your suspension for a different type of environment than a normal off-road track. You don't have the undulations of unevenness of dirt or clay. You've got flat areas that are covered in carpet, and you've got bumps and jumps and other obstacles like walls and things of that nature, but you don't have that constant, you know, up, down, left, right of the suspension. And so you want to maximize for straight line speed and for cornering speed. And your cornering is going to, you want your car to be flat, you want it to be low, and you want it to be tighter. So things to consider. Now, I was incorrect earlier in something that I said. They do not give us all of the machined internals, which would be a good thing to get your hands on. They do give us the XO rings, and they give us the these little inner ones here, but we do need to trim these pieces out. So we will be using at least some of those. So we might as well trim them all. If you're interested in these Kashima coated shock bodies, they are not cheap, but supposedly they're worth it. Part number 91576 for the 12 by 23 front, or no, excuse me, those are going to be our, no, those are our fronts. And 91577 for the 12 by 27.5s. And then the chrome shock shafts for our fronts are going to be 91618 3 by 23, 91620 3 by 27.5. Yeah, those are the right size. I like to lubricate the O-rings for the shock collars. Makes a big difference in how easy it is to adjust them. You don't want them to move on their own. At the same time, you want to be able to adjust them reasonably easily. Now you could just use ordinary shock oil. I would use the thinner of whatever you're using. I'm using, in this case, just some light high-performance bearing oil, which works just fine. Now, when you are putting these on, the O-ring makes it a little hard to get it on at first, and you want to make sure you're not cross-threading. So push it on and then back turn it a little bit until you hear it kind of click and drop down, and then you know you're onto the threads. Start turning. If it starts to tighten suddenly, you're cross-threading. Unwind and rotate back a couple of turns until you feel it drop in again and start over. But do not force the issue, or you will ruin a very expensive shock body. Now you'll notice that I didn't take mine all the way up to the top. Let me unscrew this a little bit to show you more clearly. You'll see that the threads end just before the top of this collar here. So if you screw this up all the way till it touches here, you may actually drop off the threads, or at least you're hanging on by only a couple of threads at most. Better to take it close to the top like that and leave it there, because almost guaranteed you're going to be adjusting it downward as soon as you get a spring on there and start tuning the car. Okay, I need to find a few things, so I'm going to pause out. Okay, so I've got some white diamond metal polish, and it removes oxidation and discoloration from aluminum, brass, chrome, stainless steel, returning surface to a brilliant shine. It has a long-lasting sealant, whatever that means. Let's see. Oh, it's vanilla scented. Ooh. So anyway, this, a Dremel with an adjustable chuck, that's an essential, and some cloth here, preferably a lint-free type, and I am going to polish up my shock shafts. Now I'm going to be grabbing them by this upper piece here where the shock the piston sits. That was a lot of gunk on there. Now this will get warm, so folding it on itself once or twice isn't a bad idea. Now, if we compare one to the other, there's definitely a difference in shine, and hopefully also it smooths it out a little bit. Okay, so we are going to need to use some Loctite on these. I am going to go ahead and put the pistons on the shock shafts right away. I think it's easier that way to make sure you've got everything identified. So you don't put the wrong piston on one of the front shafts or something like that. So just to recap on that, 1.6 front, 1.7 rear. Use one washer underneath the piston. None above, just the screw. Just an FYI, this is a Techno shock tool. They're a little pricey, but this is hands down my favorite. I've used several different types. For example, this would be one of them. This is not bad, but the edging that they do makes it hard on your hands after a while. I've got another one running around in here that is even worse. It's just totally brutal. I've got a couple in different travel bags, but this is the best by far. It's the most comfortable if you're going to be doing a bunch of stuff, doing a bunch of shock rebuilds. You will thank yourself for having gotten this. Even though you may not have a Techno car, it still does a lot of things that are, first off, it's got your primary shaft sizes, 3 and 4 millimeter. The little ball link out and ball link in tool is very handy. You'll see later that how the ball link tool can come in handy when doing things like putting these metal ball links into the eyelets. This is TLR's shock O-ring grease. It's TLR's version of green slime, which is an associated product. It's a special type of lubricant, and it's designed to minimize the amount of swelling that the O-rings will go through. They are going to swell a little bit, but this limits that, and that's very important, because if they swell too much, that means they bind up. They don't, and you end up with unnecessary amounts of stiction. Stiction is the amount of binding and the force needed to break motion on a shock absorber. So let's just line things up. I'm going to set these off for a second. Now, our little black washer-like things, we have two types. We have this type here that, if you notice, it's got a ridge, and this type here that is just a straight up spacer. Okay, now we are going to put together a stack of pieces to go into this part of our shock absorber. This is where we make the seal this is where the shock absorber, the shock shaft runs through. And we want this to be as precise as possible because we don't want it to allow the shock shaft to move about. If it gets out of line, that means that the edge of the piston is going to bind against the shock body. That's why the shocks use a thin, a slippery type of plastic and a very slippery type of inner surface. Thus the Kashima coating, things like that. So what we're going to have is we have 4 spacers, and then let's just call these ones with the ridge the end caps, okay? And we're going to have 8 of those. So we're going to have, for each shock, we're going to have 2 end caps, 1 high, 1 low. We're going to have 1 spacer, and we're going to have 2 O-rings, or X-rings, if you will. So those will line up like that. The spacers here, these little guys, are going to go underneath our pistons. So there are our 4 shock seal stacks. And the ones with the ridge, the narrow piece goes, the bottom one faces down, the top one faces up. And what that means is that that ridge is going to drop into that hole right there. And as you can see how that fits right in there like that, if you were to flip it the other way, you wouldn't have that centering effect. And you're going to find the same thing inside here when it's flipped upside down. So one of the ways that I like to do this is I take a wrench, usually a 2 or a 2.5, and I get my lube out here. Let me see if I've got enough. I may need to use some of this also. I don't know if I've got any of that left. I really need to reorder. You know what? Since this is a race car and it's getting all the goodies, I'm going to use this. This is a special O-ring grease made by 1UP. It's 1UP Blue. You get 8 grams of this. And it's not cheap, but it's really, really good at what it does. And the cars that I really want to be competitive, I splurge this stuff on it. So I'm going to take my first piece and I'm going to put it ridge down, or the small round piece down. Okay, and then I'm going to take one of my O-rings. I'm going to get some grease on it. And I'm going to grease it up inside and out. I'm going to put my spacer in place. And get my next O-ring. Again, get some grease on it, inside and out. And get my next ridge piece and put that with the little ring facing up. Then I can insert that stack into the shock absorber and pull the wrench out, leaving that behind. Now I can put one of the blue caps on. Now do not put these caps on too tight, especially at first. At first you just want to have it touch down on that little black ring, but you don't want to tighten it. And the reason is that you're going to compress those O-rings, and if you do that before you've put your pistons in, those pistons are gonna, the threading here can scrape the O-ring and damage it potentially. So it's good to put a little bit of lube on the threads as well. Now we're going to take our piston, we're going to insert it carefully, gently into our shock, and then we can tighten down our end cap. And this is ready to be filled. So let's go ahead and do our next one. Now you'll notice that I'm just doing the stacks right now. I showed you the full process on one, and now I'm just going through like an assembly line so I don't waste any more of this nice grease than is necessary. Now let's use the excess on our fingers to lube up the threads. Oops, I'm forgetting a step. My bad. I'm forgetting these spacers. I need one spacer on each shock shaft. My bad again. Not putting on my seals. Okay, 40 in front. Just an FYI on TLR's caps. It's just the way they're made. If you tighten them too far, it's going to split the cap part way and it's ruined. Just FYI. Fill it most of the way. Pull it up, pull down quickly. Repeat the process at least once. And we'll wait for those bubbles to rise to the top. Now this is emulsion building, so it's not necessary that every little bit of air get removed, but you want to make sure that you're not leaving unnecessarily large quantities. Don't pull down too quickly or you will shower yourself and your work area with oil. Now, while I'm killing a little time, I can take these this short of the shortest of the screws. There should be 4 of them. Actually, they all look the same. And pre-thread this hole here so that when it's time to do it, it's ready to go. They don't give us any O-rings or gaskets, brass washers, anything like that, because this is plastic. So it's going to seal up all on its own. Remember, don't over tighten. You do not want to strip this because you will ruin the cap. It just needs to be finger tight anyway, because once enough thread has gone through the hole, it's going to be sealed up. You don't even need to tighten. One more. Okay, so those are our fronts. And I'm going to put a drop in the cap. I'd just rather have too much oil than not enough. Okay, now I'm going to bleed out the shock. That's what we want right there. A shock that's got no or virtually no rebound. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and get a little more out of there because I want that shock to have basically be dead. There we go. Probably not going to need any extra oil after the way the first one went. Okay, we're going to do that one more time. Excellent. Good. Okay, so 29. Excuse me, I'm thinking of stroke. 4 hour fronts were going long. Okay, now this is one of the nice things about these wrenches is you have a little set screw, these measuring devices, calipers, is this set screw. So I want my front stroke to be 23. So I can set it to 23, tighten it down, turn it off to say battery, and then I've got my setup right there. So this is correct already. I got a lucky on the first time. And for yours, stock I think is 24. Yeah, 24 and 29. So you would want yours to be 1 millimeter longer. So I would have to loosen the eyelet. You know, an easier way to do this would be to pre-thread them. Take a wrench, take an M3 piece of hardware, go ahead and thread it on down till you get resistance, which means you're hitting bottom or close to hitting bottom, and then undo it, and this will make it easier to make changes along the way, not to mention putting it on. Just got to tighten that up about 1 millimeter, maybe half. Remember, you want these to be exactly the same, or as close to it as possible. So I still need to tighten that up. Let's see how that does. Right in. Let me just confirm this one is the same. Oh. Teeny bit. Perfect. Identical. Okay, 29 to the rear. Okay, there's our 29. And another reason to use a caliper lock like this is that I'm getting the exact measurement left to right. It might be a little off in its distance, like it might not be a perfect 29, it might be 28.5, it might be 29.2, but it's going to be exactly 29.2 on either side. And that's the most important part, is that that measurement be exact left to right, and we're there. I'm just recording that on my build sheet. On my setup sheet. God, I know someone is going to be like, you said build sheet and it's a setup sheet. God, I hate it when people pull ridiculous nonsense like that. Who cares? So that's one of the really nice things about this tool, is being able to take that little ball socket or ball stud. It's not a stud. It's just a ball, and close this down over it, and then gently snap it into place. Okay, blues for the rear. Now this is kind of a matter of preference. Some people like to put the color of the spring down at the bottom, so it's harder for people to see what spring you're using. If you think that someone, finding out your spring size is going to make the difference between you beating them and not, that's kind of ridiculous. I like to put it up high where, number one, it's not going to get scratched off as easy, and number two, I can see more easily what side, which color I've got on there if I just need to do a quick eye check. So these are left over because I had a second set of parts, specifically the shock shafts. And so what I'm going to do is get all the air out of that so it takes up less space. And I'm going to put that in here. It's a handy shock tool to have in here. What this does is it fits right in that groove there, and it makes it easier to undo various parts. I've probably got 10 or 20 of that same tool laying around. Okay, so let's go ahead and mount these up. And this is one of the reasons I like the stud kits, is because a 5.5 millimeter wrench will take off the shocks. I don't need to worry about a hex and then a wrench. One tool takes off the shocks top and bottom. Now put your bleed screw facing out to the side and put the wide flange on your eyelet facing rearward. Just tighten these until they touch down against the aluminum inner piece there, and you're set. Now these I'm going to make some adjustments to, since I just put those on. What I want to do is I want to push them back out until the lock nut is fully engaged. And I'll show you the difference. If you look at this one here, the stud is right to the top of the nylon. If you look at here, the stud is still inside. So what I'm going to do is loosen that stud and then retighten the bolt, and do that until one looks like the other. There we go. Perfect. Flush, but all the nylon is on the threads to keep those nuts from coming off. I was just checking there to see how much room there was. And just like the other one, I need to pull that stud out a little bit. See, this is why I like doing the the stud and the nut instead of the screw, because the hex wrench is right up against the chassis. And that can be hard on the hands. See, and then if I take it out too far, I just adjust the nut to where I want it. And then tighten down the stud again until it's tight. And then that's done. Perfect. Nice and clean. So the mechanics of the car done.